Hello and welcome to the video. As you may or may not know, I have recently finished the first draft of my first book. And so I have decided to give it a rest until October, where I want to get back to it and start with the second draft. And what about in the meantime? So far I have taken 1 month of a rest to recharge my creative energy. But now I am kind of overflowing with the creative energy, and I feel like I cannot sit any longer. I have to get back to doing something and creating. And so, what better to use this break from active writing for than fill out all the stuff that I do not have time for normally. And one of those things is world building. It is not that I haven't thought of the world building for my book ever. I have, quite a lot. And since it took me 10 years to get to this point, I have a lot of world building that has started somewhere and evolved into something completely different. The issue is, I have never actually sat down to write everything down. So I have always just relied on my memory to remember everything and keep it straight. And in the beginning, that was an okay strategy because there wasn't that much of it. At this point, no, I really need to write everything down because I keep getting confused and getting myself into plot holes because I keep changing stuff too much and nobody even knows what's correct anymore. And so it is time to write it all properly. Earlier this year, I decided on a strategy that I would use 1 day of the month to focus on world building, and that way I would get like 12 days of world building throughout the year. And that could scratch the itch of needing to world build, but also wouldn't make me like fall into the world building disease where I just spend too much time fleshing everything out and never get into the writing itself, because there is always something more to figure out and think of and write down. So, which is why this works really well, because I have exact amount of time in which I can focus on this, and then I have to get back to the book. And so I cannot get carried away because there is a hard deadline. Eventually my goal is to compile everything and transfer it into a physical notebook or a book by itself that would work as an atlas that is straight from the world of my book and would serve as this kind of relic and guide for everyone in the world and me. But to get there, I need to start writing down the world building itself. As I have mentioned, I have delved into a little bit of note-taking and world building throughout this year, but I don't have very much of it. Mostly character sheets for the main characters and some basic stuff about the world that really needs to be expanded on. Plus, there are a lot of issues inside of the book itself that need figuring out before I dive into draft 2. So that is the goal. And so let me take you on the journey with me of world building everything I need to be able to return to draft 2 with a clear idea. First things first, I have made a list of all the areas that need to be focused on. This is not an exhaustive list and it's more of a generalizations, but it's enough to give me like an outline or what to focus on. I'm pretty sure I'm forgetting a lot, and every single of the categories can get many subcategories to dive into. And because there is too much on the list to focus on at once, I have decided to make this video a series, and in this one I will be focusing on developing both the characters and the kingdom of Temart, because most of the story takes place there, and so it's a logical step to start here and then develop the other countries and other stuff in subsequent video. Sounds good? Okay, let's go. It is hilarious to me that we are starting this video with a side quest, but I'm hungry, and so cooking needs to be done, and oddly, this actually fits into the topic of world building, so let's talk about food in stories. It is crazy how much you can tell about a world simply by what food they have. And yet, many of us, me included, do not include this in the world building. And I sort of want to change that. Because just what ingredients they have available and how they choose to prepare it or how they consume it tells so much about the culture of the world. And so let's talk about this food specifically. So, what is this thing that I am making? It's zucchini fritters, and we make this in this household quite a lot because zucchini are doing really well in our garden and grandma has hens, and so we have a lot of eggs, and this is very easy and quick to make with ingredients that we basically always have at home. You thought one list was enough? Of course not. So here we have a list of characters that need to be well built with their specific character sheets. Of course I won't focus on all of them, but at least the most important ones. I was getting rather dizzy all day inside, so I have decided to move to the balcony and write a little bit here. And also, I have a little bit of company. He's looking at the birds and deciding if to go hunt them or not. It's getting so dark I can barely see. I'm rather cold and getting attacked by mosquitoes, so I guess my session is over. I have managed to make 4 pages of notes. Even I cannot see them, so yeah, that's it. I am on my way to the post office because something interesting has arrived and I need to pick it up. Oh my god, it's here. I cannot believe this. This is... I have no words. I have been squealing with excitement and stepping like a little goblin the entire time from the kitchen up the stairs to my room so I could fully, properly look at this gorgeous book. It's thinner than I expected for 500 and some pages, but so pretty. And it shipped from France, so thankfully it didn't have problems on the borders. Well, things are finally happening. I've put about 4 or 4.5 hours into world building and it's not going the way I expected. Well, I said I would focus on the main kingdom and figuring out the political situation there and the character sheets and things like that. Well, that's not what I've done. I have started with one character sheet and then abandoned it, and instead I have pivoted completely to focus on the overhaul of the human kingdom. And like, why? Because logically it's in the first 2 chapters and then it's not relevant at all until book 4. So there is a little bit of this sense that I have wasted almost 5 hours doing something that will only start being fully relevant several years down the line. But that is not the case. My main motivation for doing this first was that it's very relevant for the first 2 chapters, as I have said. And in the feedback I got to the first 2 chapters, people have said that they are not feeling fully grounded in the setting, that I could use more descriptions and make it feel less vague and whatever supposedly medieval European city, which it's not, but okay. So that means I need a proper visual for myself of what is going on in here if I want to properly convey it in the text. And so here we go, working on building out the visuals. And then the second reason why this is actually relevant is because, yes, the main character leaves this place in the second chapter, but he has been growing up in here his entire life. And so all the things are actually carried with him throughout the book, even if the setting itself is not relevant. So it's important to figure out how it impacted him as a person. So talking more about the overhaul of the Human Kingdom, I basically wanted it to give off a little bit of Slavic vibes, but also of the Baltic countries, because that's basically what the climate is like. And the Human Kingdom is like, the south is temperate but very like boggy marshland, a lot of water and acidic, so not much production, and the top is very cold, mountainy, and even going into taiga and tundra later on. So I did not want to go full on Scandinavia, but I wanted to combine the Slavic and the Baltic influences in both the culture and visuals and everything. So the first thing I have done is change the names of the human characters, and basically I have decided to give all the characters Slavic first names, but tweak the spelling slightly so it's not fully based in our real world language. And then the second part was deciding on the surnames, and so I have decided that all the nobility would have more Baltic inspired surnames because they sound more fantasy-esque. I don't quite want to say it like this, but they're like more poetic and pretty looking, whereas the Slavic surnames are more earthy and grounded and harsh, so I wanted to keep those for more of the common people. And so I have spent almost 2 hours on that, just like researching various names and connotations and like how both first names are chosen in both of these cultures, and then how surnames are like developed. Like, for example, I have found that in, I think it was Lithuania, women have different ending of their surname based on if they are married or not. And so there was the decision if I want to carry this through or not, and I decided no, because it adds too much complications. But yes, I have kept the fact that the surname is different based on whether it's a male character or a female character, so just from the surname you can tell, if you are paying attention. And for the record, I am Slavic. I have lived experience with this culture and the languages, so yeah, throwing that out there. Anyway, this worked actually quite well, because the main character's name is Peter, and for like half the book I always struggled with, it sounds too common and real world compared to the names of the other characters, and so now it fits more with the rest of the humans. The only character I have been struggling with was his older brother's name, which used to be Gal, and now I have decided to rename him to basically Alexander, which was a strange decision, but the one decision I will be actually struggling moving forward is the surname, because I have been remembering one for like half a decade now, and now I have to rewrite it in my brain to the new one. Okay, names aside, I went on and made an actual Pinterest board of inspirations. Again, doing that a combination of looking at the world, and I have picked out, like for the city, more pictures of the Baltic cities such as Riga and Tallinn, Vilnius not so much, and so that would be for city centers. But for the nature, and like villages, I went more with my native Slovakia and pictures from here. And then for clothes, that was a bit of a bigger mix, but again, it's following the nobility is more of the Baltic influence, and the lesser classes are more of the Slavic influence. And the last thing I have done is actually sit down and write it all into the Scrivener document, which I have prepared for this specific kingdom, and basically lay out all the information I remember about this kingdom to have it once and for all actually written down somewhere, and so I don't have to fish it out of my brain every single time. This was probably the most tedious and time-consuming part of the process. The previous ones were, at least, even when it was more research-based, it was fun, but this, like, writing everything down and making sure it all makes sense all together, and it's not just vibes, but also, like, actual research, actual logic, that wasn't so great. But at least one thing of my list is now checked, and so that would be all for the human kingdom. But now is the question of what I'm moving on to doing. I could return to the previous plan, or I could switch it up and go do the other kingdoms and then leave the main one for its own part later on. Either way, it's 2 a.m. and I should stop thinking and actually go to bed. Okay, so I have come to a decision that for now I will first world build all of the other kingdoms and have all of those puzzle pieces before I start focusing on the main country and how that country interplays with all of these ones. And so now I moved on to Brizar, which is the kingdom that is a little bit south of that continent where the previous two kingdoms are on. And I was working on it in the morning, and I got into quite a deep research session about what would people like eat and do if you have a continent where you cannot really live on the surface or produce anything, and so people are living in the caves, and so how does the economy work in that case? And I have basically landed on that the main part of their like food is based on like mushrooms and moss, but also algae and insects, which is a new one. And then they would have to trade in other stuff like diplomacy, medicine, which comes from the mushrooms, or things like craftsmanship, producing a lot of metal stuff because underground, so they have a lot of minerals and ores, or things like technology with water, which could be interesting because most of the world is not very technologically advanced in this sense, but they might be. So yeah, that was interesting. And then I had to go to work, and now that I have returned, I have finished the whole remaining sections on this kingdom, and it's just funny how I completely blanked out on the history here and other aspects, and like compared to the human one, it's not as well developed in all of the aspects, but also for now it doesn't really need to be, and we only visit this one in book 3, so that gives me hope that it's okay to do like just a surface level job and just do the skeleton and then move on. So yeah, Brizar is done, and moving on to the other kingdoms. Okay, still the same day, about an hour and a half later, I have now finished one of the other countries, so the third one on the list, which was the rainforest-based kingdom. And this one is interesting because I was basically researching how you can make a civilization that is like substantial in an area that's like densely forested, and so you cannot really grow crops, which seems to be a theme lately. And so diving into how spices are grown, that was an interesting rabbit hole. And basically I have decided to make this one more based on like meritocracy and like you make a standardized test, and that decides on what role in the society you get, but all of them are perceived as very important. But still, there is like a merchant council, so trade is very important in this kingdom as well. For a while I was battling with the idea of, if this is a meritocracy and there is no nobility, why would they accept basically a king or a queen, so the ruler, to be chosen by blood when nothing else is based on blood? And I have figured out some answers to that question, but it still is a little shaky. I have decided to leave it shaky and leave it as a tension in the kingdom itself, that the people sometimes undermine the ruler because they question exactly this. Alright, it is getting a little too late for me to still be sitting here and working, because I have been here for 4 hours now. Crazy, I know. Either way, I have finished another of the countries, this time the empire, which is the youngest of the countries, and I have decided to make this one into a triarchy, and so it has 3 women as the rulers, and each has a different division too. The issue this brings is making more characters, because previously I only had the one empress that was like heading this country and friends with Aurora, but now there is 3 of them, and I don't really know which position to put this specific person to, because I cannot exactly split her into 3. So that still remains a problem, but it is not a problem for now, as again, this is more of a book 2 relevance. And so for now, just having the skeleton for the king and for the empire itself is good enough, which I do have, and I am quite happy with it. Seems to be a theme outside of the human kingdom, but for all the other ones I have done tonight, that when I hit the history section, I just stare there and blank out. Like I cannot write anything down or figure any of the history, which is quite embarrassing because I love history. There is 6 big countries total, and so with the human kingdom that brings me at 4 out of 6 done, which is crazy that I have gotten this much done in just basically 2 nights. Well, I have been working on this world building since Sunday, and it's now Friday. Well, it's Saturday because it's past midnight, but yeah, who cares? And so it's technically been 6 days, but I have only been working on it, or like really working on it, for maybe 3. And so this amount of progress is really good. But it does make a little bit of an issue for me, having this much done this fast, because I was hoping to sketch out some visuals to accompany this video with like the architecture or the people or like stuff. And today at work I have barely managed to do something for the humans, and now I have 3 more kingdoms finished. So I guess no detailed visuals for all of them, pity, but I will hopefully at least make some sort of Pinterest board or just a mood board with inspirations and put that on the screen instead. I thought this would be a good spot to show you my Scrivener country page, and so when filling out the information about the country, I have the name, the defining feature, the age of the country, and the capital city as the first section. Then looking at geography, where is it located, what's the climate, what do they make, things like that. Then politics, what kind of government they have, how the power is divided, are there like regions, governors, city-states, what is happening here, how people are divided into the layers of the society, what are they foreign relations with other countries, and so on. The history section should be pretty self-explanatory. Anything I can think of about the history of this country, who did they fight wars with, how did they come to be, things like that. And then most importantly, culture. What is specific about their culture that is different from the other cultures? How do they build their cities? How do they live? What food they make? How do they dress? Things like that. And lastly, the list of characters that are from this specific country. Monday update and probably last update for this world building vlog. So, I have finished the last of the 6 big countries, and this one turned different as well, which seems to be the theme of this video. Previously, I dismissed it a little bit because it was just background of the cold tundra type country with bears. But now I decided to make it a decentralized democracy. So basically they have a clan system and elections to vote for the leader. But they let the rest of the world believe their stereotypes that they are just savages living in the wilderness. And so that makes what the villain does even more interesting. Either way, this one actually managed to prompt me to write out a conversation that will happen later in one of the books. And so, yeah, very happy with just the fact that I'm writing down stuff and doing world building, that it actually connects with the plot and the story and builds that even more. So that should probably show you the importance of doing world building and doing it well. And then I finished the other 3 small countries. These weren't as detailed, and I basically just made one paragraph describing each of them and what they do, what they are about, and all that semi-important things to remember, but because they are not like big players and don't get visited, I just let them be less developed. Maybe they will develop later on, but also they are like new additions to the world. They did not exist before. If you are looking to me for advice about world building countries, especially for a story that is very heavily political, I don't think I have any. I don't know, because this wasn't world building from scratch. This was writing down world building that I have been thinking about and developing in my head for 10 years and just never wrote down properly, and kind of expanding on those ideas. The only thing I can say is like start with some attribute or something you want the country to be known for, and then develop from there. Just make sure that everything is logically tied together and progressing all together with like the structure of the country, the climate, and like what their culture and what they are doing with the other countries. Like it has to be interconnected together. And I don't mean logic by our world, but it has to logically work in their world logic. And another important thing is thinking about a little bit of story hooks, I would say, even when just laying down the world building. Like make points where there is tension, either inside of the country, what they are struggling with, or outside with the neighboring countries. Even if it's just a few sentences and not fully developed as a conflict, it can be then expanded on in the text itself. Basically, no country is perfect, and there is always something going on both internally and externally, and thinking about that is helpful to make sure the countries and the conflicts between them are not flat. But still, world building, basically world-scale politics, is rather difficult, and even for me, even though I have a degree in international politics, and so I should be good at this, but taking it to a fantasy setting is still something else entirely. And that is it for this vlog. I will be back with part 2 about the characters and the main kingdom in this series, which I want to relegate specific time for, since it's the most important. But other than that, I hope you have enjoyed this and maybe got some inspiration or learned something new. Either way, thank you for watching. I hope you like and subscribe, and see you in the next video.